Buckle up. Controversial class today. Let us give people a moment to be with us. So if you're tuning in later, you're the ones who are watching this right from the beginning, right? The live audience, it takes a little bit of time for them to find it. It's the people who watch later that see it right from the beginning. This is a shout out to you, sending you big love. The people who watch it on replay. And if you have questions or comments, do not hesitate. Put them in the comments. We do look at the comments. But if it's an important question, send it by a direct message. That's always the best way to reach us, is a direct message, either on Facebook, if you're on Facebook, or if you're watching on YouTube. You can put in the comments too. We'll see that. But also you can go to our website, accidentaltalmudist.org, and there's a contact form there. Very easy to get a hold of us. I'd like to dedicate our learning today to the healing of everybody who needs a healing. So please join me, my friends, in praying for a refuah shlema, a complete and speedy recovery of all these names, all these people. They are in need of a healing right now. They need our prayers. May they receive the healing that they need. Hello, Pauline. Pauline Michael in the house. Shalom from Arkansas. How are you doing today? We do have a controversial class today. We're going to be getting into that momentarily. We are holding on Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos, the second tractate of the Talmud, page 32, Daf Lamed Beis. We are in chapter 2 of Tractate Shabbos, and today we're going to start studying Mishnah number 6. Mishnah number 6 is bound to ruffle some feathers. So before we get into that, please join me in saying thank you to all the paramedics. That's people who are truly in the front lines of this war against the virus. They're out there every day. They're bringing people who need it to the hospitals. Their courage is great. And we honor you, paramedics, for your service. Let me just check this. Aha. Do not disturb. It's not on. Okay, there we go. All right. Let's get into it. I'm telling you, this is going to be controversial. So the Mishnah number 6. I'm just going to read it verbatim. It's a short Mishnah. And as I said, bound to ruffle some feathers. So, Mishnah number 6. It's actually at the end of Daf Lamed Aleph, at the end of page 31. But our discussion of it will fill page 32. So, the Mishnah is, the Mishnah concludes the Agadic treatment of the topic of kindling the Shabbat lights, saying, for 3 transgressions, women are punished and die during childbirth, for the fact that they are not careful in observing the laws of a menstruating woman, and in separating challah from the dough, and in lighting the Shabbos lamp. Now, to the modern ear, this is very difficult for us to hear this. It's like, what? You're telling me that because a woman might make a mistake and not be careful and just be a little bit careless or lax in her observance of lighting the Shabbos candles, or in the laws of Nida, the laws of separation in marriage during the monthly cycle of the woman, or for separating the challah dough, that for that she would suffer the unbearable punishment of death, and unbearable for the family, that she would die during childbirth, and for the husband and for the other kids. I mean, this is terrible. How could our sages possibly believe this? Is this our philosophy? That because a woman doesn't separate the challah dough, she's going to be punished with death during childbirth? Really? So, first of all, this couldn't possibly be our philosophy, Because if there was a one-to-one correlation, right, that any woman who was lax with the challah, with the mitzvah of challah, or of lighting the Shabbos lights, candle lighting on Friday, or being careful with the nida laws, the marriage purity laws, that the husband and wife have to be separate during that time of the month that she's having her cycle and counting the 7 clean days afterward, etc. If it were true that any woman who was lax in these mitzvahs would then die in childbirth, well, then obviously no woman would ever violate these laws. We'd all know that these laws can never be violated lest it cause death. We know that that's not true. We know it's not a one-to-one correlation that if one violates these laws, that person is going to be punished with this extreme punishment. So what is it that our sages are saying? And here we have to understand that there is a principle, it's something we encounter often in the Talmud, of hyperbole. Our sages will engage in Talmudic hyperbole in order to make an important point. Another example of this, for example, is in discussing Adam and Eve. We learn that the original man, the primordial man, right, the first man, Adam, our sages say elsewhere, how tall was Adam? With his feet on the ground and his head in the heavens. How high in the heavens? A journey of 500 years. I mean, the sages are saying that Adam was light years tall. That Adam was so big that he occupied a significant part of the cosmos, of the universe itself, right? Now, did our sages really mean that he was as large as galaxies? And that then after the sin of eating the fruit, that that Adam and Eve were shrunk down to mortal size? Is that what our sages are saying? No, they're engaging in big terms, big terms, when they want you to remember what is being taught, right? How hyperbolic is the statement? That's another question, right? The answer is we don't know. We're not sure how hyperbolic the statement is. What they're saying is these mitzvahs that are incumbent on a woman, right? Because the man is in charge of hundreds of other mitzvahs, right? That don't, in the traditional roles, right? Where the woman is in charge of the home in the ancient world and the man is in charge of business. So the man has hundreds of mitzvahs that he has to deal with. Well, everything from bringing sacrifices in the temple to the laws of business and the laws of contracts and the laws of testifying in court cases and judging court cases. He has hundreds of laws. What the sages are saying here is that these 3 laws are the ones that the women have to focus on, right? And are they important? Hugely important. That's what the sages are saying. They are hugely important, right? So let me get my notes in front of me here. So they're not saying that just because, God forbid, a woman died in childbirth, that it was because she was lax in these sins, or that God forbid some woman is lax in performing these mitzvahs, that quid pro quo, she's gonna, God forbid, die in childbirth. It's not like that. But what they are saying is you should take it as if it's true. As if it's true. Why? And now here's where we get into this, into the analysis of these laws. This is where it gets very interesting. Rabbi Yitzhak says, okay, so why are we saying that she dies during childbirth in particular? Why isn't it, if a woman is lax in these laws, that she just dies? Why particularly in childbirth? So he says, well, with regard to observing the marriage purity laws, right, that a husband and wife can't be together when she's having her cycle, so that has to do with the reproductive system. And it makes sense that a sin related to the reproductive system might have a manifestation related to the reproductive system. Rava says that the pain of childbirth, right, but that wouldn't explain, that might explain why the menses, sin of the menses is related to death in childbirth, but what about challah and lighting candles? Doesn't make sense. So Rava says, well, when a woman is in childbirth, the pain of childbirth recalls the original sin, right? Remember, how were Adam and Eve punished? Adam was punished that by the sweat of his brow would he bring food up out of the earth. And Eve was punished that she would have great pain in childbirth. So when a woman is experiencing the pain of childbirth, it's like she's being judged along with all people, right? The original sin falls on all people, not just Jews, of course, but all people. And she's, participating in that trial that's been going on since the beginning of time, in which all people are being judged, and women take on that part of the judgment, where it's the pain in childbirth, right? And so since she's already, as a representative of humanity, being judged, she wants to have merits at her side and not omissions, right? You want to have merits rather than omissions. You want to have positives rather than negatives at that time. Likewise, Rav Chisda says, childbirth is so dangerous that women wouldn't survive. No woman would survive except that God intervenes, right? God intercedes on the woman's behalf. So it's like any woman who survives a childbirth, it's because God interceded on her behalf and brought her through that dangerous trial. And this brings us to understand that this idea that when we go through a time of danger like childbirth, right, that applies to all people. Men don't have childbirth, but men go through dangerous situations too. And so right here in our Gemara, the Gemara asks, and are men not judged? Answer, yes, they are. When are they judged? Resh Lakish says, when they cross a bridge. The Gemara says, is that it? The only time that men are judged is when they cross a bridge? No, what he means is anything like crossing a bridge. Is crossing a bridge that dangerous? It's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor for being suspended between two safe points, right? On the bank, you are safe. Once you get across, you're safe. But when you're crossing that bridge, and now you want to imagine a narrow and rickety bridge, right? And this is why Rebbe Nachman of Breslov had this very famous song that he wrote. I wish I could do it justice. I'm such a terrible singer. But bear with me for a moment, right? It's a very famous song where he sings, Kol haolam kulo gesher tzad meod. Right? The whole wide world is nothing but a very narrow bridge. A very narrow bridge. A very narrow bridge. And the whole thing is to never be afraid, right? Kol haolam kulo gesher tzad meod, v'ha'ikar gesher tzad meod, right? V'ha'ikar lo lefached klal, right? Better singers can do that song much more justice. But the idea is that the whole world is a narrow bridge, and the main thing is to not be afraid. Don't be afraid, right? Our whole life is a kind of trial, a kind of endangerment of the soul, right? The soul comes into this world and experiences all kinds of dangers that it didn't experience in the world of souls. And so in particular, when men find themselves in a time of danger, right? It's not that you want to walk around terrified, but that is when you want to understand that you're being judged, right? A woman going through childbirth, a man going through any kind of serious illness. It is a time of judgment. That is what our sages are telling us. Now, people don't like to hear that. Oh, that's just, what is that? That's old-fashioned, Bible-thumping, old world, terrible talk. We're modern people. We don't believe in that. It's nonsense. That attitude is nonsense. When we're in a time of danger, that is a time to take stock in ourselves, right? That is a time to think, am I leading the life that I'm supposed to be leading? Have I committed wrongs, right? Because when we're in a time of danger, that's when we want to feel. We want to embrace, if it's only a metaphor, we want to embrace the metaphor. And if it's more than a metaphor, if in fact our sages are right, and at any time of great danger, right? Whether a danger from an illness or a danger because you're in a ship at sea, in a storm, or you're living through a plague, right? At any time of danger, you want to embrace that metaphor and understand, yeah, I'm being judged. And if I'm being judged, do I feel confident that I'm bringing enough merit to this moment? Now, here's the good news. Here on our page, our sages say that even if 999 accusing angels show up to say, this guy is guilty, he's been dishonest, he's been mean, he's been impatient, he's been cruel, he didn't put on tzitzis on that day, and he neglected to pray on that day, and he didn't take this mitzvah seriously, he didn't say brachas before he ate, and they have 999 accusations of moments when you fell short. But one angel shows up to say, yeah, but he gave charity to the needy. When he received a call that somebody was homebound during the plague, needed help getting their groceries, she showed up. She went to the grocery store and brought that person the food that they needed. So if even 999 line up to accuse us in that heavenly trial, and one stands up on our behalf to say we have a merit, we did do a good, then we're going to be spared, right? We're going to be spared. So usually we survive these trials. Usually we're spared. But it's not so much the outcome of the trial that is what's being talked about here. What we need to understand is when we're in a time of danger, we recognize that we're in danger, or we're violently ill. I mean, this happened to me a couple years ago. We went to a sushi place, and I don't know what happened. I've eaten sushi many times, I've had sake many times, but this one time, for some reason, I had some sake, I had some sushi, and we hadn't even gotten to the main part of the meal yet. I mean, I just had one little bite of the appetizer, a bit of the sake, and I had a violent reflux episode. Anybody who suffers from reflux, maybe you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it was awful. I was in such pain. And if you've ever had a reflux attack, it's like it comes in waves, and it's like it finally subsides, and then you know it's coming back, Now, someone could just say, okay, so you ate the wrong thing, your stomach reacted badly, you had a reflux attack, eventually it went away. But for me, I was thinking in that moment, I'm going to consider my deeds. What have I been up to lately? Oh yes, I can point to this, and this that I've done wrong and I could do better. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing that I went through that trial, because I embraced the trial. I embraced the opportunity to examine my deeds. And I did come out of it with some change made, right? At least a resolution to make a change and to work on that change. And even if the change won't stick forever, it's stuck for a while, right? Embrace the trial when you're in a time of danger, whether it's caused by illness or childbirth or an actual trial. I mean, if you actually are having an earthly trial, there is a heavenly trial going on at the same time. That's what our sages are saying whenever we find ourselves in any kind of danger. Last night we watched an amazing movie with the kids, The Shawshank Redemption. Have you seen that movie? It's amazing. Our kids were so moved. My daughter, was beside herself. She just couldn't return back to her life afterwards for hours. She was sobbing. She was so moved by that movie, Now that was a movie about, a man who's if I don't want to ruin the movie, but, it's a movie, the basic setup seems to be a man who is innocent of a crime, but found guilty of it and goes to prison and has a terrible, terrible hard time while he's in prison. Now, what kind of justice is that? Imagine that you go to prison for a crime you didn't commit. But you can embrace that opportunity and say, you know what, I didn't go to prison for this crime, but I'm now being given an opportunity to reckon my deeds. What could I do better? What could I do better? Right? Because there's no mistakes in heaven. Anything that happens here is for a reason. We may not understand the reason for apparent injustices in this world, but there's a reason. And when we leave this world, maybe then we'll be told what it is that is going on. Now, because, right, because a time of danger is a time of trial, right, when our merits and our demerits are being weighed in heaven, and we may lose that trial, right? Sometimes we enter a time of danger, whether it's illness or, actual danger, on a highway. I mean, just a couple nights ago, okay, so there were two idiots who were street racing on Highland Boulevard here in LA, and they ended up both dying. And the passenger, I mean, it's terrible. These guys in these souped up BMWs going 100 miles an hour down a city street. They made a mistake and they died. They put themselves in a dangerous situation, and then they lost the trial, as it were. So our sages say, avoid danger, right? Try to rack up merits so that sometime when you find yourself in a dangerous situation and it can't be avoided, okay, so you have enough merits, enough positives on the scales of justice to see you through that trial, that vulnerability. Because when we enter that time of danger, right, that is when the accuser, and you have to understand in the Jewish tradition, Satan has a very different definition than what's out in the culture, right? Satan is not some independent power. Satan works for God, right? Satan is the prosecutor. It's like God runs the justice system, right? God is the judge in the heavenly court. And Satan's job is to bring the charges, right? Satan brings charges against the people, against the souls, right? So you don't want to give Satan ammunition to accuse you in the heavenly trial. And if you do, you want to have enough ammunition to give the defense attorney, the defense angels, so they can overcome Satan's arguments. It doesn't always work, right? Humans don't come through every trial. So avoid trials, avoid danger, right? And so how do you avoid danger? The sages would disagree on various strategies for avoiding danger. So for example, Rav, the sage Rav, would not get on a ferry with a non-Jew. Because Rav would think to himself, well, maybe this non-Jew, it's his time, to have his dangerous trial and to the scales in heaven weighed for or against him. And I don't want to get caught up in his trial and just be the bystander who happens to be there. And from this, we do see, right, this idea that, people get caught up, innocent bystanders die. It's like it's somebody else's trial and you just happen to be there. So Rav didn't want to be there when maybe somebody else was being judged. On the other hand, his good friend and interlocutor, Shmuel, right? So Rav and Shmuel were one of the pairs, and they would argue about a lot of things, but in a very loving way. So his good friend Shmuel, who disagreed with Rav on many things, would never get onto a ferry unless there was a non-Jew on the ferry with him. And his thinking was, well, the angel of death isn't going to be given dominion over two nations at once, right? So if it's my time, okay, it's my time. But if it's his time, we're not going to both go down. The whole ferry's not going to go down if two people who have nothing to do with each other are both on it. Obviously, sometimes, God forbid, tragically, ferries go down. But that's just the way Shmuel approached this problem. Now, Rabbi Yanai, he said, just avoid any dangerous situation, right? Like now you're getting more into that sort of more traditional Eastern European Jewish approach, to dangerous situations. As in, yeah, Jews don't go bungee jumping. Jews don't go backcountry skiing. Jews don't, go skydiving. Like, we just avoid danger. We're not adventurers, right? Not in that way. Obviously, Israelis have a different attitude. They're more macho and gutsy, right? But this is where it comes from. It's this idea that we're going to avoid the dangerous situation lest we put ourselves in a situation where the angels can come say, oh, look at this guy. He brought himself close to the edge. Let's start a trial and see who is he. Do his merits outweigh his demerits, right? You just want to avoid that situation altogether. You don't want to have a miracle performed for you, says Rabbi Yanai, right? You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to need a miracle, right? Like you can imagine, oh, we got lost in the back country and we would have died, but miraculously there happened to be somebody walking through there, that normally wouldn't be there, but he was there and he saved us. Like that's a kind of a little miracle that you don't want to have to rely on. You don't want to be the beneficiary of that kind of miracle, because even if you get it and your life is saved, somehow it's going to decrease your merits. You don't want to use up your merits unnecessarily, says Rabbi Yanai. And then interestingly, in passing, and this is the last point I'm going to make, then I'm going to look at some questions if you've got anything in the comments. So Rabbi Yishmael says, why does the Torah command us, command is a Torah commandment, not a rabbinic enactment, but a Torah commandment, that there needs to be a guardrail around the roof of a home? That just sounds like common sense, right? If being on the roof is a place that's tall enough that if you fall off it, you could get killed, what a nice law. The Torah says, put a guardrail on the roof so people don't fall off your roof and hurt themselves or even kill themselves. Makes sense. Why do we need any further explanation? But Rabbi Yishmael says, no, we got to dig deeper into this law a little bit. Because according to Rabbi Yishmael, if a person falls off your roof, so that person was destined to fall off your roof since the beginning of creation. Right? Him falling off the roof, that was going to happen. God can foresee the future. Right? God knows everything that's going to happen. Free will is given, and God knows what's going to happen. Right? So if the guy falls off the roof, he was going to fall off the roof. The question is, whose roof does he fall off? Right? If he falls off your roof, that's a problem for you. Not only because you might have liability that you were negligent, you didn't have a guardrail on your roof and then he fell off your roof and so it's your fault because you were negligent and you can be sued. That's a very modern way of thinking. Rabbi Yishmael is saying something different. He's saying that guy fell off your roof, so he underwent a time of danger and he lost his trial, right? So for whatever reason, he came to the end of the line. These were the days that he was allotted. Perhaps even his life was shortened because if he committed some sin, who knows? That's his problem. But if he meets his end by falling off your roof, so that's a problem, because if somebody's end comes about through you, it's because you bear some kind of guilt. It might be the guilt for being negligent in guarding your roof, but it might well be something else, right? This is the same idea as when the first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and the second temple was destroyed by Titus, right? The Roman general. The temple was destroyed and Jerusalem fell in both of those cases because the Jews brought it on themselves, right? We brought that on ourselves through baseless hatred, through neglecting certain important commandments. We brought that on ourselves. But the person by whose hand the destruction was actually accomplished, that's not a good job. That's not a gig that you want, right? If heaven punishes another person via your hand, it's because you bear some kind of guilt for your own shortcomings. And you don't want to be that person, right? You want to remain innocent. You want to keep establishing merit for yourself. And you never want to be in a situation where harm is brought on another, even though they deserve it, but through your hand, right? So this is tough. It's very tough to understand, right? I mean, on the one hand, like, you want to be a security. Let's say, should you take a job as a security guard, right? Should you be a cop? I mean, we're honoring cops constantly. We've honored law enforcement several times, right? Now, if a policeman comes to shoot a bad guy, is this a demerit for the policeman? And here I would say no, because that's different. The policeman didn't do anything wrong. In fact, what he did is he saved lives, right? So it's a total merit to the policeman that he killed a bad guy. But if a bad guy ends up getting killed by another bad guy, right? Two bad guys get in a fight and one of them ends up dead. Okay, that's more the case we're talking about. The one who ends up dead surely deserved to die. He was a bad guy. Maybe he was even a murderer, right? The one who ends up killing him in that fight and getting punished for it, right? Even if he doesn't get punished for it, but he probably will, it's because he's got his own stuff that he's dealing with. So we never want to become the instrument of punishment for another, right? Unless, we're very solid in our own behavior. Okay, this has been a class about an ancient mode of thinking, right? About trials that we undergo when we are in times of danger. It's very popular in modern times to just say, well, I reject that kind of old world philosophy, that kind of theology, because it's the same as victim blaming. No, it's not victim blaming. We never do this kind of analysis about others, right? If somebody else is ill, if somebody else is suffering, if somebody else is going through a difficult trial, we don't make any kind of assumption about what they did to lead that thing happening to them. Because remember, first of all, innocent bystanders get caught up in these trials all the time, right? When Job suffered, his friend said to him, surely you did something wrong. But he didn't do anything wrong. A heavenly trial just caught Job, right? And just like Andy Dufresne talking in the Shawshank Redemption, he says, I ran into a tornado, right? And that can happen. You can be the bystander when a tornado happens. But when it happens to us, to ourselves, yes, it is very healthy to say, I want to examine my deeds. Because maybe this is a moment where I can realize, you know what? No, I haven't even been living up to my own code, let alone God's code. And because I came so close to death, I'm going to come out of it with a new resolve, a new path, an atonement, and a resolve to make so much more out of my life than I would have if I hadn't had this very difficult trial. That is making meaning out of tragedy. Viktor Frankl talked about that extensively when he was in Auschwitz. Viktor Frankl didn't do anything to deserve being in Auschwitz, but he found himself in the most difficult trial in Jewish history. I mean, to be in a concentration camp, seeing that death constantly, he knew very well that all these people who were dying didn't do anything to deserve that death. But for himself, he resolved to create meaning out of that tragedy and to build something out of it that wouldn't have been built otherwise. And some would even argue that Israel was built out of the tragedy of the Holocaust. And but for the Holocaust, maybe the state of Israel wouldn't have happened. But the Holocaust happened, and the state of Israel happened too. When you get into this philosophy stuff, it can just become overwhelming and depressing. The lesson I think that's important is for ourselves as individuals to examine our own deeds when we're in a time of danger and resolve to make more out of that moment. That is the key. That is what I had today. Let me see, is that a comment? So bad things happen to people who have not done enough good in the world. I didn't say that. I said when bad things happen to others, we have no idea why it happened to them. When bad things happen to ourselves, we can take that as a moment to examine our deeds, right? Particularly illness, right? And on this page, our sages are mentioning illness particularly, right? So here on page 32a, the sages taught one who became ill and tended toward death. I mean, God forbid, in this COVID plague, you find yourself on a ventilator. God forbid. But if that happens to you, yes, you for yourself, not for someone else. You can't tell other people to do this, only for yourself. That is a time to examine your deeds. So one who became ill and tended toward death, that person can, they say to him, right, but a sage could say to him, not us. They say to him, confess, as all those executed by the courts confess. Confess means examine your deeds. Like if you may not even know what you've done wrong, But if you know you've done something wrong, yeah, acknowledge it. Acknowledge it at that moment. Even if he is dying of natural causes, it is worthwhile for him to consider his death and atonement for his sins. So now they're saying, even if you know you're going, right, you're leaving this world, so then it's actually valuable to take that final stock there and say, well, for whatever sins I have, done in my life, may my death be an atonement, so that I will be done with dealing with my sins. I won't need to be refined later, and I can just move on to the next place. Here we go. When a person goes out to the marketplace where there are fights and disputes, he should consider himself as someone who has been handed over to a soldier. You see, it's not just illness, any kind of danger. If you find yourself in a war zone, right, fighting for your life. I had on my podcast, I haven't released the episode yet, an amazing story of a Muslim young man who was caught in the civil war in Yemen. This is the sweetest guy ever. He did nothing but engage in beautiful interfaith work and helping others. And like the only kind of career he ever had was working for nonprofits to do good for other people. It's the only thing he was ever interested in. But he found himself in a war zone, literally a war zone where people were dying around him, right? You find yourself in a situation like that. No, it's not your fault. No, you didn't create that. No, you don't deserve it compared to other people in the world who are much more evil than you. But if you're in that situation, so think about, if I'm spared, what could I do with my life? What can I do? What can I do more? What can I fix in myself? And what can I create out of myself and out of this opportunity that wouldn't have happened had I not had this trial? Right? It's a kind of a bargaining that we enter into with the judge of the world. And our sages are saying it's healthy. It's healthy to do that. If he climbed into bed and fell ill, he should consider himself as if they took him up to the gallows to be judged. As with regard to anyone who goes up to the gallows to be judged, if he has great advocates, he is spared. And if not, he is not spared. So another part of this teaching is never give up. No matter how dangerous it looks, right? Whether the illness is so severe or the trial that you're under, you're in a war and like people are dying right around you, like never give up hope, because you might get saved, right? You can await salvation, you can long for salvation, and it may come. Never give up on life. I think I'm starting to repeat myself. So take this lesson. Take any time of personal danger as if it's a trial, weigh your own deeds, and to resolve to make something out of it that wouldn't have happened otherwise, and that may help you sort of survive that heavenly trial that's going on above at the same time that you're undergoing the earthly trial of that danger. That's what I've got for you today. Sending you big love.